Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this nice summer day. The panelists and I are extremely excited to see that we have folks joining from around the country and from many different functional areas. We see folks from IT, HR, customer success, other orgs, and that's exactly our intention with this session. My name is María Lebowitz. I'm the managing director of the technology industry here at Propeller Consulting, and I'm so excited to introduce today's topic. We'll be talking all about operationalizing AI, specifically moving from experiments to embedded value in your enterprise. I think everyone's experienced this. Every single company, probably all of your companies, are racing to find value in generative AI. Every CEO is requesting of their senior leadership teams to charge ahead with this new technology and find new use cases. Many companies in the news you're seeing already making headcount decisions based on forecasted efficiencies that haven't been realized yet. There are new companies spinning up daily, new offerings from those companies that we're seeing every single week. Many fast movers across the enterprise have kicked off experiments. These experiments are happening in parallel, even within the same company with different vendors and technologies. So what we're here to discuss today is how we move from this environment of pilot concepts to a unified approach across the enterprise, grounding in business value all along the way. We're going to be sharing with you what successful companies are doing now and patterns to make you successful. I'd like to introduce our fabulous panelists that we have here today. All of these folks have direct experience guiding Fortune 500 tech companies in generative AI strategy. First, we have Mark Fitzgerald, Managing Director of Propeller's Denver, Colorado office. Mark is on the board of the Colorado Technology Association. Great to have you, Mark.
Yeah, great to be here, Molly.
Awesome. We also have María Sara Roberts, a director here in our San Francisco office. María Sara is also the leader of our business data and insights practice. And María Sara leads tech industry clients in all sorts of operational transformation, including AI strategy and enablement. Welcome, María Sara.
Happy to be here too.
We also have Addison Iwanaga, an operational excellence consultant based also in San Francisco. Addison has partnered with several of our leading tech industry clients to design and implement scalable AI pilot initiatives all the way from concept to execution. Welcome, Addison.
Thanks, Molly. Really excited to be here as well.
Awesome. Thanks all. Just by way of framing, I'd like to start with just a few statistics enumerating kind of the challenge ahead. We are in an incredibly exciting time, as I mentioned. We have access to this new generative AI capability, yet companies are consistently reporting all over that they're not seeing the ROI immediately from their efforts. We've seen reporting that 80% of projects are failing, specifically generative AI projects, and that's twice the rate of projects that don't leverage AI. The company research entity that created this study interviewed AI and ML experts to find out why, and they realized that the leading root cause of this failure was actually that the problem statements are not clearly enumerated. Another statistic, this comes from Atlassian. They surveyed 5,000 tech workers and learned that a third of organizations haven't even trained 25% of their staff on how to use AI technology. Without knowing how to do their jobs differently, enterprise workers will keep doing them the same way, and that's one of the many reasons why the value is not realized. And the last piece here comes from Accenture, a survey of 2,000 C-level leaders. Almost half of them, 48%, indicate that high-quality data is lacking in order to operationalize their generative AI initiatives. Further, 75% of those surveyed said that good quality data is the most valuable ingredient to enhance their Gen AI capabilities. Between problem statements being unclear, people not being ready for AI, data not ready for AI, these are some of the symptoms that we're seeing that kind of tee us up for today's session. Today, we're going to be digging into the dynamics specific in the tech industry. We'll be talking about what is operationalization of AI, the role of organizational structures, how you orient your orgs, the workforce implications, and how to measure success and actually measure that ROI. We please invite your questions along the way. You'll see a Q&A feature on Zoom to ask questions of the panelists, and I will feed those into the panelists at the key moments. We also have a chat functionality. Everyone can see your chat, so please feel free to comment, add thoughts, data from your organization, things that you're seeing. We would love to see that in the chat. And lastly, we'll be gathering feedback and insights from you along the way. You're going to see little windows pop up with polls throughout the webinar. Please respond to the polls. We'll be aggregating all the data we hear from the polls, and we'll be sending it back to all participants via email after the session. So let's kick off with our first poll, actually. We'd like to hear what one word best describes how your organization feels about Gen AI right now. So go ahead and answer that poll. This is a good practice for us. And once you respond to the poll, the window should disappear, and we're going to launch right into our first question for our panelists. Feeling ready, panelists?
Let's go.
All right, let's get started.
Let's talk about how this is playing out specifically in tech. I'd love to hear about the current state of AI adoption in the tech industry right now. Is the push to deploy AI technology for enterprise apps different for tech companies versus non-tech industry companies? Let's actually start with you, Mark. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Molly. As we look at this, absolutely, I believe tech organizations have led early AI experimentation, and frankly, in many cases, still do. They have the infrastructure, the talent, the culture to experiment with new technology. And many of these organizations quickly saw the opportunity to integrate AI both into their customer-facing products, but also into their internal workflows. You think about auto triage, summarization, QA, those types of things. And that experimentation culture has really been a strength, but it's also been a trap in some ways as well. So some of the things we've seen is many initial POCs were siloed at the team or individual employee level. Thus, this initial success was focused on solving a really specific use case, and future scalability across the organization wasn't really incorporated into the planning for that pilot, the planning for that solution. So where this is particularly evident is challenges with scaling AI solutions in a cost-effective way. So what appeared affordable at the individual or small team level quickly became cost prohibitive when costs started to be projected out at scale. Additionally, the rapid evolution of AI capabilities and our natural shiny object syndrome, we all fall into this, when it comes to wanting the latest and greatest tech, has caused what some folks refer to as pilot purgatory. And that's become really common. We build something, pilot it, plan to scale, even in a scenario where it makes sense, and then we get sidetracked by a better solution that just came out, or we've heard the hype and it's right around the corner. And we absolutely are seeing this with generative AI. There is no clear winner. There's many competitors right now, so they are all introducing new capabilities that are creating this challenge. So even for the most forward-looking, the most AI-forward teams, they are hitting some friction then in operationalizing AI. And where we've seen this is if you try to quickly scale an AI pilot and you don't think about the transformative requirements beyond the team that you're focused on, so across the rest of the organization, it becomes really hard to realize meaningful impact. So gains within one function or team are often quickly lost when downstream internal partners haven't also evolved their technology, their people, and their process. So thinking about those structures that were built for a different way of operating and haven't been updated. So we've seen this play out with Gen AI pilots taking off in engineering as an example, but they're not connected to CI/CD pipelines or QA processes, so they start to wither. Legal, data privacy, model governance, those things also tend to be lagging in federated organizations that are holding up the realization of value at any level of scale. So compared to other industries, tech orgs are more advanced in their understanding and adoption of AI, but they're not immune to these common structural blockers. So we really need to make sure as organizations continue to invest in piloting that they're also investing in the business process redesign, change management efforts that are necessary to realize their initial investment thesis. So given the impressive wow factor of continuing AI, the evolution of continuing AI capabilities, you have to be really intentional and ensure you don't get caught up in the can we build something cool mindset, but really try to take the time to fully think through, well, what will this look like at scale? What will this look like when we try to operate across the enterprise as a way to define, is this a pilot that we think can add value for the organization? So as far as disrupting, and I'll wrap up with this, Really consider shifting your pilot scope from being isolated within a team to being vertically integrated. So don't focus on the team, focus on a small sliver that is vertically integrated that will start to show you where you have some gaps across different functions. As part of your pilot vetting process, include conversations about what impact the pilot would create at scale. Up front, talk about that. You don't need to be 100% accurate. It's hard to do that, but talk about upfront, can I articulate my directional understanding of the feasibility and value potential? And then finally, ensure you incorporate the people and business process change and transformation that's required. This is really where we've seen folks struggle. They don't include that. We focus on the tech, and then value isn't realized.
Thank you, Mark. Fantastic. I loved what you said about pilot purgatory. I'm sure a lot of listeners are kind of feeling that they're in that right now in their organizations. Curious to move to talking about operationalization and what that actually means. What does it really mean to operationalize AI inside a company across the enterprise? And why is it so hard to get right? Addison, I know you've seen this several times in the wild. Would love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, it's a great question, Molly, and a challenge that we've seen companies face quite a bit. I think with just how exciting AI is, it's really easy to get caught up in standalone systems or really flashy demos, but it's really important to remember that it's absolutely paramount to make sure that we're embedding AI into our workflows and our processes and our decision making. And I think you'll know that this is working when things feel very scalable, repeatable, safe, and of course, valuable. There's a few things that go into this. And the first thing that always comes to mind for me is around governance. And the companies that I've seen implement AI the best have always started out with this sort of relentless curiosity where they want to go and explore and see what's out there. And this has a couple of different great benefits. First of all, I think it just allows them to see what works for their company and what doesn't. But it also builds a lot of excitement and momentum around AI too, which I think is really important. And ideally, they've been thinking about governance this whole time, but I think it's after this phase where governance really comes to the forefront and allows them to be really intentional about which platforms they want to move forward with, which ones are really working for them, and making sure that they're avoiding sprawl and that they are really making sure they're being safe with regard to hallucinations as well. And then also considering access. So access that your employees have to the system, as well as the access that your AI system might have to other systems as well. And this also makes me think about integration too, which I think is really, really important, and making sure that it fits in, AI fits in with your existing tool set. And the last thing we want is for this to feel like yet another thing on top of all of the tools that we already have, especially as an end user. It shouldn't just feel added on. And the last thing that I think is really important, there's quite a few when it comes to operationalizing, but is architecture, and particularly around flexibility of architecture. So what makes this so hard is just how quickly the space is moving. And leaders are understandably apprehensive when it comes to investing thousands of hours and thousands or millions of dollars into a solution that they feel may just be obsolete next quarter. So in order to battle this, having a really flexible architecture and then coming up with a very sharp baseline for what good enough is. And with these two things combined, it allows you to really hit the ground running, make sure that you're getting your people up to speed and comfortable using AI, which is probably one of the most in-demand skill sets at this point. But also with that flexible architecture, you can grow and scale alongside the technology as it's evolving. So again, I'll reiterate that architecture is really, really important, but I do want to say that it's so much more about your people than it is about the tech. There are so many great companies building incredible solutions, and your people are the ones that are really going to make the difference. Realizing that some people are going to want agility, some are going to favor stability, and some just want quick wins. And figuring out how you can align all of these interests and effectively communicate them out across your team is really going to be what makes people successful when it comes to operationalizing AI.
One thing, Addison, that you mentioned briefly is the access to information and data. There's been a lot of examples in the work that we've done with our clients where there's an underestimation of how ready we really are in that aspect, and a lot of testing that happens when you're trying to pull out information from different teams to provide something to particular users at different layers, and underestimating the data architecture and the structures and how they are and the governance that you have can sometimes delay the progress to really operationalize and cause some extra work or rework for things that maybe were kind of in the back end that you weren't really thinking about, that starts to surface as, ooh, we actually really need to think about these things too, because you have to layer out the right proper security and privacy standards across the organization, where you're making essentially everything available to your employees when we're talking about it from an internal standpoint.
Yeah, great add-on, Maria, Sara, and Addison. I loved how you talked about, yes, there's a long checklist of technical things to address and consider, but there's also the people aspects and the leadership required to kind of manage all these stakeholders, make sure all the big rocks are cared for, to be able to kind of move these solutions along. So fantastic, thank you. Speaking of stakeholders and orgs, let's move on to talking about the org chart itself. I'm curious, what kind of organizational structures have you all seen to help move companies beyond pilots to truly scale and operationalize AI? What is the role of the org? Maria, Sara, curious if you could start with this one.
Yeah, definitely. I think what we've noticed of organizations that really escape that endless pilot stage really share one thing. They think about AI as a core business capability where they have a budget, where they have a real owner assigned to it, and a real runway for it to grow, rather than it being a siloed project or a side kind of business project in a lab. It's integrated more holistically and trying to be built out as a business capability. Some of the winning structures that we have seen to scale or that promote AI scale have been a generative AI task force or a center of excellence that acts as a service layer for the organization. Another one has been, and I know Mark alluded to this at the beginning as well, a federated innovation model where you have central standards, but you allow local teams to experiment for their business nuances. They're really the ones that understand what's required and what's needed to make it come to life in a way that's useful and impactful. And then another one is cross-functional squads, where you're bringing in AI subject matter experts in product, data, legal, UX to really accelerate all of these initiatives. Where this kind of breaks down, where we don't see a lot of success in scalability, is when everybody owns it really just means that nobody really owns it, where you're having technical islands, where your technical teams are not extremely integrated or very well connected to the business outcome. So you're building technology that is good, that technology that is at the forefront, and you're experimenting with new models, but it's not really solving the right questions, or not solving the questions that are tied to the organizational outcomes that you're trying to accomplish. And then the other one is when you're having a lot of pilots with no pathways to scale. And this is particular to the tech industry because you have so many engineers that want to play with the newest things out there. And they're excited about doing these things, but without having that vision and strategy about how do we make this a product and how do we find the path to scale, then that's where it kind of like breaks down. And so a couple of the things that we have noticed that really promote scale, designating ownership is key, whether that's a single individual, where we've seen this sometimes in lying on the chief data officer, or designating an AI leader, or in actually most often cases, an executive task force that has control over budget, over OKRs, visibility and accountability. That's a great way to continuously promote scale. An AI center of excellence, I mentioned this briefly, can really accelerate that because you're having a functional team internally that acts as an enabler. So you're setting standards, you're creating artifacts that other teams can use, you're sharing tools, that you're auditing value, and really allowing them to share knowledge across the organization so everyone's not learning from scratch. They're leveraging best practices that have already worked. We have one of our clients really built an ROI calculator that was driven by developers and FinOps team to help the business owners that maybe don't have all that technical knowledge about how much is this going to cost, or at least the depth of understanding of impact of ROI. So you're helping teams really think about that in a way that's effective as they're developing their use cases. Federated models can also be a really great way to scale as they balance speed, but also consistency. So you're providing, you're ensuring that your ideas are desirable. So you're thinking about the users, your technical feasibility. So you're bringing in the experts, and then that it's defensible in a way. So you're ensuring compliance and risk and security assessments even before a single token is spent. Before spending on a single token. AI squads also is a way that you can embed that into the teams where you're bringing that talent directly into teams that already are functioning to solve business problems with real owners with built-in adoption strategies that are existing in place. So you're not creating things from scratch. And I think another component is leveraging shared tooling and infrastructure to drive reuse. One of the things, the conversations that we had often with one of our tech clients was, how do we start with a why not model? We already have tried models, tools, platforms that have been vetted, that have been onboarded, that have been integrated, that have been assessed for quality and standards. Why can't new experiments use those and start first with figuring out, why can't I leverage some of that that's existing that will allow us to do a long-term maintenance and support easier, that will allow us to do much more interconnection within the teams, leverage already existing materials that are in place that people can plug and play at different places. So starting with that, like, why not? Why can't I use what's already there versus, oh, I saw this model and that platform that I want to leverage. And one key one is executive visibility really keeps momentum high. When your AI use cases are tied to strategic business goals, then you avoid becoming just a fun project and you start being focused on building a core capability. And that really makes it scalable because you have a lot of effort and a lot of traction towards initiatives that are moving the needle for the P&L standpoint. And where we don't see these structures, it really just slows scale because you're having fragmented efforts, you don't have clear ownership, and you're not including productization pathways. So they stay in this kind of pilot mode, regardless of how great the technology might be.
Fantastic. I have a follow-up question for you, but first I want to launch a poll here for our listeners. What is the biggest challenge your organization faces in operationalizing AI? Please give us your feedback. And again, we're going to wrap all the responses to the polls throughout the session and send them back to you via email. So we would love your responses. Maria, Sara, you mentioned a couple things: centers of excellence, task force for AI leaders. Those are cool concepts, and I've seen those deployed at several of the tech companies we work with. I'm curious, tech companies are weaving AI and ML, they have been for years, into their product roadmaps. We're talking more about kind of distributing GenAI capabilities, internally across the enterprise. Are they using the same task forces and the same centers of excellence for both of those areas, or are you seeing it kind of segmented?
I think we saw it at the very beginning as something that was a little more siloed. AI was coming out and people were thinking about, how do we do this? How do we embed this? Let's stand it as a separate thing. It has been shifting more towards, all right, we should actually integrate that into our existing governance models, our existing strategy and prioritization and productization, because it's no longer a siloed thing. I think we talked about this earlier, that it's kind of like the internet. You wouldn't say, "Ooh, let's use the internet for one piece of our business and think about it separately." It's now more integrated and weaved into how business works, how business operate, and how business create value. So I think it started more siloed, and then it's moved into, how do we embed this into existing structures that we already had to ensure that it's part of the organization's core capabilities. I'm curious also if Mark or Addison, you've seen something different.
No, so I've seen similar to what you mentioned, Maria, Sara. Yep. The only other thing I would add that we've seen, there was recently a good Gartner survey that came out, is you talked about the executive component of this and executive engagement. And their survey was around CEOs' perceptions of C-suite AI savviness.
Mm.
And there was a significant drop off after CISOs and CIOs, as well as chief data officers, that along the lens of CFOs, COOs, really in the like 9 to 14% ready to where they need them to be.
Mm.
So that's a big gap too in developing those groups. You need to make sure you're bringing that leadership team along to get the executive support that you alluded to.
Mm-hmm.
I
Hopefully,
totally agree. I'm sorry, Mel, go ahead.
I was gonna say, hopefully all those leaders are here today in this session. Yeah, Addison.
No, I totally agree that executive leadership is absolutely key. One other point that I think is pretty interesting that I've seen in companies that I've worked with is a little bit more of a bottoms up structure as well. Certainly you want the tops down to be kind of overriding all of this stuff, but especially with larger companies, as you've seen, you kind of see solutions that are a little bit more homegrown pop up, and making sure that there's a forum for people to talk about what they want to build and what they are currently building in this space is really important. Because I've seen it quite a bit where maybe team A wants to build this new homegrown solution and they're not communicating with team B, who also has something very similar already in the works. And this can really lead to a lot of platform sprawl if you're not intentional about communicating with each other and knowing what's going on in other areas of business.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. So there could just be like an education FYI kind of function in some of these cross-org entities. Okay, we have another poll coming at you. Who owns Gen AI in your org right now? We would love to hear who owns it. Is there a specific business unit or team? No clear owner, another owner? Please respond. And again, we're going to bundle all the responses. You'll receive them via email. So thanks for your data on that. All right, let's move on. Everyone hears and reads about the anxiety created around how AI is reshaping the workforce. We'd love to dig into that topic. What are the skill sets needed for AI success? Where will entry-level jobs come from in the future? Also, this concept of the virtual workforce or agentic workforce, it sounds very transformational. We'd love to hear more about this and about what we're seeing out there. Mark, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, happy to dive in. And this might feel a little surface. We could have a whole hour-long conversation about this front. So to level set, yeah, AI is now and is going to continue to have a massive impact on the workforce as we know it today. CEOs are really making this clear. And from some CEOs we expect, so Dario Amodei, from the CEO of Anthropic, saying half of all entry-level jobs could disappear in 1 to 5 years. You've got Andy Jassy at Amazon saying as we roll out more Gen AI and agents, it should change the way that our work is done. In the next few years, we expect this will reduce our total corporate workforce. But then you have it coming from other, maybe less expected pockets. So Jim Farley, the CEO at Ford, saying AI is going to replace literally half of all white-collar workers in the US. Or Marianne Lake, who's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase's Consumer and Community Division, saying, I could see our operations headcount falling by 10% in the coming years. So let's be clear, jobs are going to go away. We have to separate jobs and headcount. They could be two very different things, but jobs are going to be replaced. New jobs will be created, but some jobs as we know them today are going to go away. Additionally, the structure of individual roles, teams, and functional areas, those things are going to fundamentally shift. So when we think about a job, we need to step back and think, a job is really just a collection of tasks. And some of these tasks are rote and repetitive and probably more than we'd like to admit. We spend time on those activities. Yes, there are other things that are more strategic and value creating that we tend maybe not to be able to get to. So as a team, we need to think about a team as just a collection of the roll up of those tasks. So in building jobs and teams for coming years, what we do is we work with companies to create 2 seats at every table for AI. So what we mean by that is when you're developing a team or a function, you need to think first, what is the role that AI can play that can just take tasks off of people's plate? It can do it. We let it run. There's very little engagement from us. It just does the work. And then the second role for AI on the team is to serve as an assistant to the individual team members or their collective team in completing their tasks in a way that allows them to be more efficient and more effective. So we think about AI as a teammate in these 2 different contexts to allow us to begin to see how the entire org structure is going to need to be reimagined for companies if we want to maximize value that we're getting out of our AI investments. With respect to skill sets required for AI success, we're also seeing a rapid evolution occurring here. There was some great recent research that came out of Stanford's Social and Language Technologies Lab, and it identified emerging trends that are going to shape the future of human work. And really, the key takeaways from this research was when comparing skill rankings by average wage, so they used average wage and required human agency. So interesting as we think about agentic, but looking at human agency, they're really believing that there's going to be a shift in valued human competencies moving from information processing type skills to interpersonal skills. So skills like analyzing data or information, monitoring processes, documenting information, performing administrative tasks. Let's be clear, these are well positioned to be taken over by AI. Human agency is really not meaningful in those scenarios. On the other hand, skills like organizing, planning, prioritizing work, training and teaching others, communicating with team members, monitoring and controlling resources, these are all projected to be valued at a higher level due to the impact human agency can have on these tasks. So this leads to that million-dollar question that many organizations are wrestling with of, well, what's the future of entry-level jobs? And Molly, I feel like every conversation I'm in, that is coming up. And I can tell you can see my background here. It's not a chateau in the French countryside, so I don't have the exact answer on this. If I did, that's where I would be, because it's truly a multifaceted question that includes skills required to enable our workforce, this existential crisis of expected enrollment declines happening, frankly, at U.S. colleges from a workforce perspective. When we think about immigration policy, all of these things combine to shape the workforce. But what they lead is to a couple ideas on how we think of enabling that next generation of workers. First, we can look to the trades as an example. So the trades who had skill gaps for entry-level hires for decades, they've used apprentice type programs to build those skills to allow folks to come in and be successful. We can look to those as an example. In a similar way, you see organizations like Cummins who realized there weren't enough diesel mechanics, so they created a diesel mechanic university, specifically investing in building those skills to bring folks into the workforce. There's also the potential for more structured, multifaceted, rotational type development programs as a way that companies can prepare their next generation of workers. That's not new. It was really popular 80s, 90s. That could make a return. The big question, though, of all this remains how long companies expect that entry-level talent will stay at their organization. Recent data, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says the average 20 to 24-year-old stays at their job for 17 months. So the question is, where is that return point, right? How do I know what my break-even point is for investing in that talent and that I'm going to get the return? So that's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, fantastic. So much
ahead.
in there, Mark. I mean, so many different dynamics. What were you going to say there?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, you talked about job architecture as well. That is also, we're not just displacing roles. The whole architecture of a job is going to change. So looking at that, thinking about the way that we look at a digital versus an agentic workforce and pulling that in as well. That's something that I think we need to consider as how the individual team structures, functional structures are going to change. Again, I'll point to, we have some use cases on how we've done this in the past that can be leveraged for success. So 3 examples of that. Companies, if you look at the automotive industry, have highly integrated supply chains with external partners. So they have roles that have responsibility for managing the work of others that they don't do, and bringing some of that premise forward when we think about the digital or agentic worker. Companies that rely heavily on external agency partners for marketing or advertising capabilities, they're using that and bringing that capability into their organization. And then finally, legal counsel is a wonderful example. There's very specialized capabilities where organizations will go out to external legal counsel and use that at a point in time. Another way to think about managing external talent, bringing some of those management principles into how we think about managing digital and agentic workers. So quick wrap up. Yes, we're going to have to incorporate agents into our workforce. It's going to transform the way that work gets done. We will create new roles for how we manage that workforce. And I think we have some of those reference points that we can rely on to shape how we go about it. I don't think we're starting from ground zero. That's the really good point on our digital workforce. Um, but I do think we have to be thoughtful in this endeavor and recognize that what worked tomorrow or yesterday won't necessarily work tomorrow in how we think about our work structures.
Yeah, I love that. It's daunting, but also hopeful. And I love some of those creative kind of ways to look at companies that kind of have been doing these concepts or piloting certain things and different avenues that could be applied to this. So thank you for that.
And I'd just add that, Mark, you mentioned a lot of things that are about thinking about the future and what's coming. And your last piece, like, how do we manage that digital workforce? I think that is a question that all teams are struggling with today because people are using it. Even if it's not dictated by the company, they are using GenAI. So how do you ensure that you're embedding clarity into where you can leverage GenAI in your workflows, but also the accountability and responsibility. If you are going to create a brief using generative AI, what's your role or your team's role on reviewing the outputs of that to ensure that it's not just kind of like, oh, great, I'm going to shoot it over to the next phase, but like those stage control gates to really ensure that you're having the leveraging the tools, but really still keeping that accountability and ownership of whomever's using those tools for the creation of content.
And Maria, Sara, one final comment as we wrap up this question to that point is when we've worked with clients, what we do is we talk to them about, you create job descriptions for your human employees, create a job description for those AI digital employees, because that gets into the responsibilities. It gets into my expectations. It gets into the give and the take and the role that I have in making that digital employee successful. So actually going through the process of creating a job description for that digital teammate has had a significant positive impact in helping folks to understand how they partner with that digital employee.
Yeah.
I know this is on the mind of many people team leaders at this moment. So thank you for all those great thoughts and ideas. We did receive a question from an audience member specifically about resistance on the part of stakeholders. And this could come from some of the workforce concepts that we just talked about. The question is, I'm curious if the panelists can address strategies to overcome internal resistance to incorporating Gen AI into workflows. Has anyone encountered resistance to some of the initiatives we're seeing at our clients? What has worked?
Yeah, I'll give a quick one, but I certainly would love to hear from Maria, Sara, and Addison as well. Especially in the US, but in general, people equate value with the tasks that they do. I am important to my organization because I do these tasks. So when there is a threat to those tasks being replaced by AI, it's a threat to how I create value. So what we've worked with leaders and organizations around, and it's hard to get people reconnected to that the work they do needs to deliver against the mission, vision, strategy of the organization versus check the box on a specific task. So that's one way in trying to get that resistance down. If this thing leads to helping us deliver on the mission, vision strategy, great. But you need to divorce folks from the I am my tasks. My tasks are who I am, and that's how I create value, is one way we've done it.
I think to me, it's also really important to focus on what we're having AI take over, right? I heard something kind of hyperbolic, but about there's a lot of AI that's taking over my creative work, and that's not necessarily what I want. What I want is AI to go do my laundry for me. So if you can make it so that AI is actually taking up the kind of the more mundane parts of people's work, I think there's going to be a lot more traction there, making sure that it's filling that need of this is the part of my job that I don't want to do, and it's actually being easier for me to complete the job and do the parts of my job that I do want to do. I've seen that it's been pretty easy to get people on board once you have them focus on that and realizing that this is really just going to make their lives better, easier, and happier when we implement AI.
Yeah, great point. Like freeing up brain space to focus on the outcomes versus just checking off the outputs. Love that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the only other thing that I would add to that, and I echo what you both have said, is, Addison, you mentioned this at the beginning, it's a process and tool change, but you need to really consider the people, how you're bringing them along, the change management strategies that you have to ensure that they understand what it's going to be doing, how it's going to be leveraged, and that there's how it aligns to how they contribute valuably to the work that they're doing, and at the same time how you're helping them with the adoption. Are you providing the right resources and tools for them to feel comfortable with how they should be leveraging this? Are you providing the right training spaces where it's safe to kind of fail and experiment rather than, ooh, I need to start doing this differently now, and I don't really know how to do it. And so there's a lot of, am I going to be judged for this? Am I going to be evaluated for this if I really don't know how to use a tool? So providing those change management strategies to help with adoption will really smooth out some of that friction. You're still going to get it. There's a change curve where people are kind of rejecting it a little bit at the beginning, but with communications and creating value and bringing them along the journey of why we're doing this, eventually you can move them to adoption and actually seeing the value from these different initiatives that you're instituting in your organization. So change management, I think, is a key component. It always is from a tooling and process change. But I think for generative AI, because you have this additional layer of fear for job or fear for what's coming next and a lot of uncertainty in the future, it becomes even more important as you're rolling out these strategies.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you for the question, Liz C. Really appreciate that. If anyone else has questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can ask our panelists any question. That's the beauty of a live webinar. Awesome. Let's move into the next question for our panelists. Curious, this is the million-dollar question in addition to the workforce piece, Mark, but how are leading organizations measuring success at the end of the day? We get the ROI question all the time. What does meaningful ROI actually look like? How are companies thinking about measuring it? Maria, Sara, I know this one is a meaty one that you've seen a lot. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think to start, where you're trying to figure out how or to understand whether AI is really working in your organization, it kind of splits out into three aspects, like the operational health. Can the systems that you are running run fast? Can they run safe? And often enough to be useful that you can reliably scale them. And that can be, there's a lot of things that companies are measuring here from a latency standpoint, from an uptime standpoint, from hallucinations. Are you really getting the output that you were intending to? Is it actually creating more confusion or sharing back information that's not accurate? And error rates, like that. Those are some of kind of those metrics. There's also a lot of automated evaluation scores that are happening where you have the machine computed quality checks that is giving you kind of like health scores on how your systems are performing without a lot of human grading. This helps you track the model performance and continuously integrate it into your CI/CD or production pipelines. And then adoption obviously is a big one from the operational health standpoint. What is the usage rate? Are all the users that are eligible to use it actually using this tool each week? And as you're seeing progress, is this number increasing or not? Those are kind of some metrics that we've seen from the operational health standpoint. A second component is the business financial impact. And I'll dive a little bit more into this in a second, but it's what we've been discussing about business value and business outcomes. Is this really having the P&L impact that you wanted and moving the needle in the direction and to the extent that you were hoping for it? And this one's the meatiest of all subjects, where you're really talking about that return on investment, the money that you're putting in the investment, that it's not just a cost center, but rather you're seeing it as an investment that it's going to generate additional value. And the third one is from a strategic and kind of risk perspective. Is your AI capability growing because of all of these different investments? And is your exposure shrinking? Are you getting better at how you're doing things, that you're doing more with less risk, that you're doing more with increased security, that you're doing more with better data protection, because that's only going to continue as all of these experiments and kind of you're scaling the AI initiatives across the organization. So those are kind of like the three main areas where companies are trying to understand where success measures for AI should come from as they're scaling operations effectively. And now we can dive a little bit deeper into that particular ROI piece, which I think is the meatiest one. There's this GenAI paradox, and this has come up in multiple different surveys in different ways, but the consensus is that around 8 in 10 companies are using generative AI in one way, shape, or form. But the consensus is also that, admittedly, about the same number like about 80% are still saying they're not seeing the impact that they were expecting to see in their bottom lines. So why is that? We started off with measuring ROI for individual experiments, rightfully so. So what is the efficiency gains that we're seeing? What's the time savings from using these tools? What's the productivity outputs that we're seeing an increase on? What are the cost savings? Where are we saving labor hours? Where are we saving processes or tooling that we can replace with some of these initiatives? And on the other side, now you're starting to track also costs, like what are those API and technology integration costs? What are the token costs, which is kind of like the most popular measure of units and currency as you're thinking about that. But while these are kind of easy to track, they really don't give you a full picture of how they're impacting your business value. And so, for example, if you're spending $10,000 in a tool that increases productivity because it saves X number of hours per employee, that's awesome. But if you're spending also $10,000 in a model, but the usage for the model is 1%, then it really isn't as valuable, even though the dollar spent is similar or the same in that case. So where is the problem that we're noticing that the companies that scale are really addressing head on is triaging that connection between where usage, costs, and business value correlate. And so that means that we've noticed a shift in metrics that now are focused a little bit more on outcomes and P&L statements. So how are you really thinking about it? Can it run? Does it play? And does it really advance the enterprise? And so modern CFOs, and of course, though, everyone's asking the question, where are my returns? Is this really worth it? Are we doubling down on the investment? Are we pausing? Are we including more? Are we really focusing? And those are the questions that all the CFOs today and CEOs are really trying to answer. And so there's a lot going into these kind of changes in calculation. I'll share a couple of examples that we've seen, but it's a one kind of popular one is where you're thinking about, is the value that you're getting from the output and the investment that you're doing at least 4 times the money that you put in, so that your outcomes are 4x, a multiple of 4, then your investment. If it's not, then you either need to refine your use case or retire it. If it is, then by all means, it's something that's demonstrating some of the value. And I'll just do a very brief kind of example that should be easy to follow to give a little bit of dimension to that. I know Copilot has been one of the ones that a lot of teams have been using from the beginning, where we've seen actually more metrics and statistics because it's been happening for a little bit longer. So if you think about a 200 developer team, and their productivity uplift is about 56%. I think that's kind of where the stats are today. That means that they're saving maybe half an hour a day per developer. So that's kind of the outcome. You're getting the productivity lift. If you're thinking about the time saved, so you get half an hour a day times 200 developer teams times 260 days a year, because they have vacations and holidays, times your 48 kind of average loaded rate, then you're talking about a $200,000 kind of savings in time saved. So that's your output in a monetary value, like $200,000. When you divide that by the cost of the licenses that we're going to estimate about a $45,000 a year for each of those 200 developers to have that turns into a 22 multiplier. That is clearly a huge impact value for the organization, a no-brainer. If that would have been 2 or 3, then you need to reassess, is this investment really going to be something that we want to focus on for the long term? So translating those outcomes into monetary values that you can compare against the investment is where we're seeing a lot more of the math kind of being pulled in. And so some of the things that we really see that increase this ROI success as you're getting more granular on these measures is defining what the measurable performance is. So how are you improving against the baselines? And oftentimes you won't have very clear baselines, but taking the time to doing hypotheses and really thinking through where you're standing today, even if it's a guesstimation, that will still give you something to compare and contrast against. Then you can get better and smarter about refining what those targets are as you move forward. Connecting governance to value. So having governance scorecards where, sure, you want to do a project, let's talk about what we need to see for that project to move forward. Kind of like doing a work back of what's your outcome metric for each of these kind of like new use cases? What are you trying to really accomplish? What's the risk profile? How much is this going to imply for us from a safety, security, and compliance standpoint that needs to be calculated into these ROI metrics? And what's the unit economics target? Like, what are you trying to accomplish what is this actually going to cost from a tooling and labor perspective? This really forces teams to link the metrics to P&L outcomes directly. So you're within your governance structure, you're really already looking to prove or disprove an ROI. And then there's this, like teams are adopting this 3-layer scorecard. Gartner has one as well that focuses on kind of like translating these milliseconds into model accuracy into dollars. So from an operational, business, and strategic standpoint that I mentioned at the beginning, making sure that it's performance and people are using it, making sure that it's expanding long-term capabilities and reducing risk, and that it's moving the outcomes from a P&L standpoint. And then change management, we talked a little bit about that, so I won't mention that again, but I do think that change management is one that really gives a lot of return on investment because you can see where the adoption starts to bring back the value at a quicker rate if you have change management strategies versus if you don't. That's going to take people longer to start seeing like leveraging the tools that you're creating in a space where you could start seeing them better if you bring them along the journey adequately. And so I think another thing that we've kind of seen from these ROI models is right sizing the tech stack, where you're thinking about small models first. Where and how can you really show or leverage multi-models where those small models make the most sense rather than having to go to the larger, more expensive ones for a task that you can kind of split apart. Say, all right, we're going to do these different expected outcomes. Which ones do we need to pull in for large models and which ones can we actually do with smaller models that can gain cost effectiveness? And I think the final one is like, we are really seeing that continuous evaluation loops. High performing organizations that scale AI are constantly looking back and refining their prompts and retraining their models and looking at those metrics that they set out to track at the beginning and how those are performing today and making any adjustments necessary to really make sure that the value spreads across in a longer time period.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very comprehensive overview of ROI. And I loved how you really grounded in, quantifiable ways to compare use cases. I think one thing we're seeing is like the amount of energy, excitement, or even like a depth understanding of the technology is, not evenly distributed. And so some of the early use cases that got spun up or a lot of excitement around aren't necessarily the highest value. And so you have to have this apples to apples way of comparing one to the other. So thank you. Fantastic ideas in there. Great. Before we wrap up, I'd like to kind of pivot to answering questions from the chat or from the Q&A feature. And if anyone in the audience has additional questions from our panelists, now is the time to put that into the chat or the Q&A feature, pardon. We did receive one, Mark, a follow-up to your first response, actually. You mentioned that one of the causes of quote unquote pilot purgatory is the current reality that new cutting edge tools are being released regularly. What frameworks should organizations use to determine if or when they should commit to a solution, knowing that there could be newer or possibly better solutions available around the corner? The eternal dilemma. Mark, thoughts on this?
Yeah, for sure. So first, I think it's understanding and looking at with existing capabilities, what's the value you receive through integrating AI into the way you're working. And recognizing that if that is delivering meaningful savings or higher engagement with your customers, stick with that until the investment required to get to the next level justifies the return that you're going to get through a capability that's exponentially better. I think there's also some times where you have to make a decision like, is this critical to my business or not? And am I going to stay with this, even though there might be an opportunity to do something different, because I'm going to invest that time, energy, effort, dollars in another area that's more important to the business or to my customers. So delineating what are the things that you have to evolve from a competitive perspective or a cost basis perspective, and the things that, frankly, you're okay with just being 10% better. Even if you could be 20% better, it's not worth the investment because it takes away from other areas. So one way, it's hard, right? It is really hard because things are changing on such a rapid basis. But some of the things you do need to say, hey, I'm 10% better. I'm good with that right now. And I'm going to turn my focus to other areas of the organization.
Well, one of the things that I talked about and kind of going along with that, Mark, is identifying that baseline for what good enough looks like. I think if you wait until you get to something that's going to be perfect, you're going to be waiting forever. And there's so much value to moving now, both in terms of the efficiencies that you're going to gain with your business, but also in terms of your people, right? It's a skill that people need to learn, just learn how to work with AI. So the quicker that we can get people to do that, the better. So by just identifying that baseline and hopefully exceeding it, but at least meeting it, it allows us to move really, really quickly there as well.
Thanks for that, Addison. I invite anyone in the audience here to please enter into the chat one insight that you're walking away with today. What did you hear today that was inspiring? We talked about what it means to operationalize. We talked about workforce changes. We talked about the org chart. We talked about defining ROI, measuring ROI, what success means. So many topics covered that we could have dug into each for multiple hours, it seems. So please share with us what was most impactful for you? What insight are you taking away? Plop it in the chat. We would love to hear from you. And with that, we'll just wrap on kind of grounding in a lot of the different things and recommendations that we heard. One of the things that I noticed, and the concepts up on the slide kind of ratify this, the panelists recommended a lot of things that are not new, that are not rocket science, not deeply technical concepts, but really the grounding of healthy organizations. Healthy organizations invest in governance, they invest in culture, they invest in workforce planning. This is not new. So in a way, it's reassuring that investing in those things will continue to allow you to drive higher returns. McKinsey did a study on healthy orgs and their returns in AI and novel technologies. They achieve 3x higher returns when they are defined as healthy. So I'm just curious from the panelists on these recommendations that we've talked about throughout and the things on the slide. Any final parting thoughts for our audience today?
Yeah, I could take it first. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Maria. Sara. I would just say the biggest thing is remembering that the people and process side has to evolve alongside the technology. So double down on that. Make sure you're making appropriate investment in that area as well.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And I'd add to that as you're thinking about where and how to leverage AI, or you already maybe really keeping the focus on what problem are you trying to solve. I see our clients coming back to this so many times after they've derailed, and it's like, oh, whoops, we deviated just because the tech is fun and cool and there's new models, and that's going to continue to be the case. So just continuing to ground on what's the outcome that you're looking for and what business problem you're trying to solve as a center point across your AI scaling initiatives.
Great.
Thanks. The last thing that I'd say is I think it's really easy to think about these things sequentially. Like we want to do exploration, and then we'll think about governance, and then we'll implement and think about change management. But just kind of highlighting with kind of tech in general, it's never too early to start thinking about governance or your change management strategy, and making sure that you've got a plan kind of from the get-go for all of these things is the same with AI as it is for all these other tech implementations, and maybe even more so just as we're going more and more agentic and AI is going to be able to do things on its own. Thinking about our risk management, especially in our governance, is going to be really important up front.
Fantastic parting thoughts. Thank you, panelists. And I would just like to share that all of our panelists today came from Propeller Consulting. We're a woman-owned nationwide consulting firm specializing in operational transformation. We would love for you to learn more about Propeller. Check out our website, propeller.com, or reach out to any of us. We're all human. We're here to answer your questions. We would love to hear from you after the webinar. Many thanks to our audience. Please continue this conversation in your organizations. Share the data and insights that you learned today. We at Propeller are rooting for you on your journey to operationalize this new great technology, and we're here to help you. So thank you all so much for joining. We will be sharing the recording and the insights gathered in the polls today with you via email. Thanks to all for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
everyone.
all.